What's the only weekly wrap-up of the top compliance and ethics stories? It is This Week in FCPA with Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, and Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitor. Each week, Tom and Jay highlight 10 stories which caught their collective eye, talk about sports and movies, highlight top podcasts, and preview their upcoming events. Join This Week in FCPA each week for a one-stop review of the week's compliance and ethics highlights. This Week in FCPA is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
On This Week in FCPA, we look at the following stories. Are compliance certifications worth it? Jeff Kaplan thinks so and says so in the FCPA blog. Does Zoom portend more FTC enforcement actions? Matt Kelly thinks so in Radical Compliance. More issues in domestic corruption for pharma? Mike Volkov takes a look in corruption, crime, and compliance. Avoiding COIs during the holidays? Rick Burt and Navix Global's Risk and Compliance Matters. Did France make a U-turn on corporate liability? Lawyers from Debevoise explore in NYU's Compliance and Enforcement Journal. The Swiss begin SBM's offshore corruption investigation. Jacqueline Jaeger tells us more in Compliance Week. What's the scope of the FCPA internal controls provisions? Lawyers from Sherman Sterling discuss in JD Supra. And how can a board of directors use data? James Howard tells us how in the Harvard Law School Forum on Corporate Governance. It's December, and Tom has a new guest on the Compliance Life. Meet Kim Yapchai, Chief Counsel, Environmental, Social, and Governance at Tenneco, Inc. Tom's podcast with my colleague Mikhail Reeder-Gordon on Wirecard is so popular that they've spun it out into its own series called The Wirecard Saga. And on 31 Days to a More Effective Compliance Program, we consider training and communications. All this and more on This Week in FCPA, episode 231.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, back again with Mr. Monitor himself, Jay Rosen, for This Week in FCPA, episode 231, for the week ending December 4, 2020, the 50 Days to Inauguration edition. Jay, as TrumpLand continues to live in fantasy and denial, we are on the 50-day countdown to the Biden inauguration. There was lots of interesting compliance and ethics stories this week. So what do you say we jump right into it?
Let's go for it, Tom.
All right, Jay. First up, we have an interesting article from Jeff Kaplan, posted in the FCPA blog. And Jay, it really presents an interesting strategy for FCPA compliance that is both easy, effective, and extraordinarily cost-effective. And that's the certification. This is not a certification for third parties. This is a certification for employees. Jeff made that clear.
Will be looking at
and he really points to two reasons for doing a certification.
A few weeks ago, the FCC
one is,
took an enforcement action,
and they're really both psychological. One is it focuses the employee's attention on the compliance program,
FTC charged the company with 5 violations of the
by focusing on the compliance program, you obviously get them to think about it a little bit. It also is a stop and think control, meaning that even though it's not a criminal act to lie on a corporate certification, many people stop and think about what they're certifying to, and they want to tell the truth. This can be a powerful tool, both as I said, as a psychological, behavioral psychology attribute, but also it can work for you as a defensive measure in your documentation that would show the government. And I would point you to the long ago Morgan Stanley declination where Garth Peterson, the Morgan Stanley managing director, signed to multiple certifications that he had not violated the company's code of conduct or the FCPA in the middle of while doing it. He had received training. He signed certifications. He'd received training so that he knew what he was doing. He knew it was illegal, and he lied about it. And that protected Morgan Stanley when Garth Peterson was prosecuted individually. So don't forget the lowly certification, if I could put it that way. It's something that can be extremely useful and extremely helpful on a go-forward basis.
Perhaps at the expense of
Thanks, Tom. So Matt Kelly in Radical Compliance this week asked the question, does the Zoom FTC enforcement action portend what the Democratic
security was up to standards,
administration will be looking at in those 50 days. A few weeks ago, the FTC took an enforcement action against Zoom for misleading statements the company made about security. Ultimately, FTC charged the company with 5 violations of the Federal Trade Commission. And in the settlement, Zoom agreed to implement new data security, get an independent assessment for security program every 2 years, and submit to annual compliance certifications from the FTC. What was notable from the settlement order was what it did not include: no monetary penalty, no notice to Zoom consumers about the settlement, and no offer to Zoom customers to exit contracts they may have had with the company.
Fundamentally,
that left the FTC, equally notable was what the settlement did not include.
And we're going to do
no penalties,
differently once
no notice,
administration gets
and no admission of wrongdoing.
That
left the FTC's 2 Democratic commissioners peeved.
Ready for change.
Zoom stands ready to emerge as a tech titan, but we should all be questioning whether Zoom and other titans expanded their empires through deception. The dissent really is worth reading from Rohit Chopra. 2 implications jump out. First, Chopra stresses the importance of security by design at the strategic level, and that senior executives need to be thinking about security. Second, Chopra's line about Zoom and other tech titans taking advantage of exponential growth, perhaps at the expense of prudent business practices. In both cases, it means documenting your business decisions becomes more important. If the FTC accuses your firm of not ensuring that tech security was up to standards, you'll need evidence to return fire when someone like Chopra says the company wasn't doing security. And as you always say, Tom, document, document, document. This might portend bolder FTC actions. Chopra laid out several steps he'd like to see the FTC take more often in its investigations, including more emphasis on helping consumers, better FTC investigations, more rulemaking to clarify what constitute unfair or deceptive practices, and to revisit the wisdom of third-party security assessments. Chopra also called for the FTC to coordinate with other regulators both in the U.S. and abroad. So what will happen? Fundamentally, Chopra's dissent reads like he's sending a message. This settlement stinks, and we're going to do things differently once our administration gets in. So CISOs, compliance officers, and board directors, heed his words and be ready for change.
Jay, next we had an article from Mike Volkov in Corruption, Crime, and Compliance, where he took a look at a recent special alert from the Office of Inspector General from Health and Human Services, and it's around bribery, corruption, and fraud in pharmaceutical and medical companies' speaker programs for doctors. This has been a well-known way for particularly pharmaceutical companies to bribe doctors to write prescriptions of their medicines. And the healthcare professionals are basically paid with very nice dinners, meals, entertainment at sporting events or other events, and the pharmaceutical companies would claim it's a speaker program so that they individual doctors are alleged to have given a speech or received value for their compensation. Of course, it's difficult to give a speech when you're at the Rangers hockey game or at the Knicks basketball game, or at a very nice Midtown Manhattan restaurant where usually it's quite loud. Perhaps now it's not so much. But healthcare professionals are rewarded with lucrative speaker deals. They condition remuneration of the speaker deals on hitting sales targets when you hold them at venues or during recreational events or otherwise in a manner not conducive to an educational program. It's obviously a red flag. High-end restaurants would include that. When you have wives, girlfriends, and others, that's a pretty good indicia. So we had a major domestic corruption enforcement action involving Novartis this summer. It's over $700 million in fines and penalties, and it's very appropriate time reminder, Jay,
and if you receive
that
such a gift,
the FCPA obviously is internationally focused, but domestic corruption can be just as costly, so that companies need to review any high-risk areas around domestic corruption, whether that may be a government entity or other, as we saw with the indictments of the Speaker of the House of Illinois and the Speaker of the House of Ohio earlier this year for domestic corruption. So a timely reminder from Mike Volkov. And even if you don't do business overseas, you might need to do a risk assessment.
Last but not least, make sure to train your employees
for domestic corruption.
Indeed. Next up, we have a timely article from Andrew Burt. Comes to us from Navix Global Risk and Compliance Matter blog.
Without taxing too much of their time.
Mr. Burt tells us 6 ways to avoid conflicts of interest during the holiday gift-giving season.
And if you have
first thing you should do is focus on appearance and
ask your
intention.
manager or
to avoid a conflict of interest, shift away your focus from the messages you meant and instead pay attention to what you may be communicating to others. Above all, never accept a gift of any type that may create a sense of obligation, either explicit or implied. Number 2, consider the value of the gift. One of the ways a gift communicates intent is through its value. When receiving a gift, always ask yourself, is this nominal in value? Don't let the presence of any branding fool you. An expensive item isn't okay to accept just because it has a logo on it. Number 3, share the gift and never solicit. Quality gift baskets cost anywhere from $20 to $200, and if you receive such a gift, what should you do? How about getting in the holiday giving season and share that with your coworkers? Number 4, don't give or accept cash. There's a lot of debate whether cash or cash equivalents like gift cards are appropriate. That said, there is one cash equivalent that may be acceptable. Many gift cards allow you to make a donation to charity, and that might be the way to go. Number 5, check your code of conduct. These rules can help you make the right decision. And number 6, train your employees on company policies around conflict of interest. Last but not least, make sure to train your employees on your organization's COI gift giving and receiving policies. Offering a micro-learning session before the holiday is a great way to keep your audience informed without taxing too much of their time at what can be a busy time of the year. And above all, remember, when in doubt, speak out. And if you have questions about whether a gift is appropriate, ask your manager or other internal resource.
Jay, we're going to take a look overseas in a blog post in New York University's Compliance and Enforcement blog by lawyers from Debevoise about a new French twist or French law, twist on French law, making corporate successors criminally liable for the actions of their acquired companies. The law basically got changed by a court case, a landmark decision, whereby public limited companies may now be held criminally liable for the prior criminal conduct of the companies they acquired through mergers.
In November 2017,
this is somewhat ameliorated by
offshore, and
the only liability can be fines and penalties, and it's not debarment or other more serious remedies, fines and forfeitures, I should say, to the exclusion of all other criminal sanctions available in the French law. However, if the purpose of the merger was to escape criminal liability, courts may impose all available criminal sanctions on the acquiring companies, irrespective of the date of the merger. This becomes effective or became effective on November 25, 2020. So this is a pretty big change from prior French law, which held that there could be low liability for the acquiring company for the prior bad acts of the target company. And it really speaks to the need for robust due diligence in the pre-acquisition phase, Jay, so that a company would know what its risks and potential liabilities were. And if you have a subsidiary or buying a subsidiary of a French company, you need to be aware of this change in French law, Jay.
Great. Next up, Tom, we have an article from one of our favorite friends, Jacqueline Jaeger, over at Compliance Week.
The company
and she takes a look at SBM offshore as they end their FCPA case,
overall,
but begin another investigation with Swiss authorities. Dutch oil and gas services company SBM Offshore confirmed that it reached the end of its deferred prosecution agreement with the U.S. Department of Justice 3 years after resolving FCPA. Unfortunately, the company now faces a fresh corruption investigation from Swiss authorities. In November 2017, SBM Offshore and its wholly owned U.S. subsidiary, SBM Offshore USA, agreed to a $238 million criminal penalty in connection with a widespread bribery scheme. While SBM Offshore said Monday that the DPA signed with the Department of Justice ended without extension, in that very same statement, however, the company revealed 3 of its subsidiaries received a notification, and I'm not even going to try to say it, from the Office of the Attorney General of Switzerland, concerning suspicion that the subsidiaries failed to take necessary measures to prevent execution of corrupt payments. This looks at agreements that were concluded with the Netherlands in 2014 and Brazil in 2018, as well as the DPA with the United States. SBM Offshore's Chief Governance and Compliance Officer, Eric Legendick, said in a statement, "We did not expect the development in Switzerland, as Swiss authorities have been involved in the matter from the time we settled Netherlands in 2014. We will engage the Swiss public prosecutor and seek clarification." In its 2019 annual report, the company provided details on the extent to which the compliance program is mature. Overall, the compliance program is deemed to be transitioning from a compliance culture to beyond compliance level. While the company has made great strides in satisfying the Department of Justice DPA, it certainly must be disappointing to have to deal with retroactive incidents instead of moving forward to being a good corporate citizen. Hopefully now SBM Offshore, its board and current management are in a much better cultural position to face these allegations, to make amends, and to move forward.
Jay, next we have a interesting case that's I found on JD Super by an article by some lawyers from Sherman and Sterling, and it involves the former Goldman Sachs managing director Roger Ng and his criminal trial against or involving OneMDB. And one of the charges against him is that he conspired to launder money and conspired to violate the FCPA. And in the internal controls provision, he raises 2 very interesting defenses. One, he argues that the FCPA's language specifically refers to the transactions and disposition of assets of the issuer or the alleged bribe payer. And he argues that was not himself or his employer, Goldman Sachs, but OneMDB itself. Of course, completely trying to ameliorate the fact that it was Goldman Sachs' actions which facilitated the corruption. But the second part is perhaps a little more interesting, and he claims that he didn't violate the FCPA internal control provisions because an accounting those focus on accounting provisions, and there was the focus here was on controls in the compliance and legal group. And if the FCPA's accounting provisions, including internal controls, only relate to accounting controls as opposed to compliance controls, he should not be prosecuted under this. Now, Jay, this is pretty interesting because the Department of Justice and SEC, as you might guess, take a fairly expansive view that really all controls are compliance controls. Any control that the company has as part of their internal control scheme is covered by the accounting provisions. And the defendant's trying to argue, no, it has to be accounting controls that is covered by the FCPA. So a very interesting case that could significantly reduce down, although I certainly understand the argument it would really, in this type of situation, I think really hamstring the government going forward. So it's going to be interesting to see if the court even addresses this.
And third, technology tools continue to make quantum
one of your earlier comments, there have been SEC commissioners who have discussed this, and Hester Pierce and Eli Roseman issued a statement in their dissent of an enforcement action on this point that Matt Kelly and I talked about in Compliance Into the Weeds podcast. So they stated that if conduct reflected a failure of an internal accounting control, that was an unduly broad interpretation, including
there are risks that can impact the outcome.
So it's going to be interesting to see what the court will do, if anything, with this. And certainly something we're going to need to watch going forward.
So in our last article of the day, cyber risks something that's come to us from the Harvard Law School Forum on Corporate Governance. James Howard asked, how can a board of directors use data?
Data compliance risk
data
on whether the use of data
is and continues to be a game changer for organizations across the world. And data science is evolving at an incredible pace. The use of data and related risks are so significant for many companies. Increasingly, boards need to take an active role in understanding how data is being managed. The following questions are intended to raise awareness among board members. First off, how is your data being used? Three revolutions are taking place simultaneously. First, the range of data available to businesses is expanding. Second, the tools and capabilities of data are evolving at an astounding pace.
Who did you speak with this
And third, technology tools continue to make quantum advances. So what are the opportunities? Organizations continue to find innovative ways to leverage data and to achieve objectives. The opportunities range from using data to enhance existing products and services, creating new products and services that can only exist because of the ability to process huge volumes of data, and optimizing operations, whether through improved management reporting, being able to capitalize or monetize accumulated data on hand.
Go blue!
As with embracing every new technology, there are risks that can impact the outcome, and generally speaking, these risks are false starts, bad or incomplete data, detected errors, breach, theft of unauthorized use of data, and brand risk. Cyber risks are an important component of data risks, generally focused on outsiders gaining unauthorized access or to stealing your data. Unlike cyber risks, the data compliance risk focuses on whether the use of data violates regulations, policies, or contractual obligations. Companies should develop and implement data governance programs that include data stewardship, leadership, connections to business leaders, objectives, strategies, plans, and tactics. Boards should ensure that they have the right knowledge and resources at their disposal, and management may have thoughtful discussions, and they may be included with outside advisors or anybody else to help them get up to speed on the issues. So, Tom, we are in December, and we have a new Compliance Life. Who did you speak with this week?
Jay, I have a great podcast series on the Compliance Life this month. I have Kim Yapchai. Kim is the Chief Counsel, Environmental, Social, and Governance at Tenneco. She was previously the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at Tenneco, and she's basically taken on the role of Chief Sustainability Officer. We have a great conversation about Kim's undergrad career and curiosity around economics, which led to a business degree in economics at the University of Michigan. Go Blue.
Go Blue.
And also then moving into law school, and she called herself a business person with a law degree. She went directly in-house, which is a little bit unusual. So she's been in-house her entire professional career. She talked about her journey in-house and the mentors she had and the lessons she learned that really helped her move into her first CCO role at Whirlpool. She talked about that. She talked about the CCO role at Tenneco. And she also talked about how all of that helped prepare her for heading up sustainability for Tenneco, and that in many ways it's a natural fit for a chief compliance officer to move into sustainability because it's really all about managing risk with multiple stakeholders. I really thoroughly enjoyed myself. She's a wonderful woman and very interesting. It's also a new month, Jay, for 31 Days to a More Effective Compliance Program, sponsored by Affiliated Monitors. And this month we're looking at training and communications. So we began on December 1 Tuesday with social media as a 360-degree communication strategy. Wednesday, using social media to innovate in compliance. Thursday, how Dun & Bradstreet use social media to help further their compliance program. And finally, I should say we started with the introduction, so I got those out of order. Nevertheless, they're all available on our iTunes channel, so check all of those out. It's also Tom Webinar Week. You want to tell us about that?
Yes, but before I do that, I wanted to point out that my Affiliated Monitors colleague, Mikhail Reeder-Gordon, has gone full-time and official with the Wirecard saga that you have been speaking about throughout the summer into the fall. And now it has its own series, and it's available on the Compliance Podcast Network. In terms of your webinar, Tom, you and Stone Turn partner Stephen Martin and Stephanie Holmes, Director of Solution Consulting, Conversant, are going to have a joint Conversant Stone Turn sponsored webinar entitled Using ECP Generated Data for Continuous Monitoring and Continuous Improvement. In the event, those listeners who tune in will be able to learn about compliance metrics, what they are, and how you can get them now. How can you best use these metrics to inform each part of your compliance program, and how to create documented auditable trails. It will be held on December 10th at 12 noon Central Time, and details and registrations are in the show notes. Now you've got a cool podcast coming up. Why don't you tell the listeners what you and Megan will be talking about?
And so Megan Doherty heads up my production crew. She has her own company. She's a co-founder of One Stone Creative. Sure. And Megan, in one of the most yeoman efforts I've seen in a long time, has put together about a 50-page report on business podcasting. So when she sent it to me, I said, Megan, we have to do a webinar on this. She said, okay. So we're going to look at this One Stone Creative survey of all things business podcasting. If you're interested in finding out more about podcasting, or you'd like to just maybe think about it for yourself, then this is going to be the podcast for you. It's going to be Wednesday, December 9th at noon Central, 1 Eastern. For listeners, or rather attendees, will receive the full report, and it's a very hefty report. So check us out there. Jay, also, I'm doing a very cool webinar on Monday, December 7th, and I am co-hosting with, or co-presenting rather, with Nita Madev. She is the CEO and co-founder of Vault Platform. And we are going to be, our moderator is Maxine G., Chief Risk Officer at the London Stock Exchange. This is a webinar sponsored by the London Stock Exchange. Netta is in the United Kingdom, so we're going to be starting at 10 a.m. Central, which will be 1600 GMT. All of these webinars are free. It's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of great information. I really hope you'll join me for or really one or all of them, Jay.
Sure. So join K2 Integrity for 2 great events in December. On the 14th, I'll host a webinar on proliferation, financing, risk, threats, and mitigation. The webinar will explore critical issues around understanding and combating the financing of WMD proliferation. And then on December 17th, Dolphin and K2 Integrity's financial crimes compliance experts will host their latest Ask an Expert Finquiry webinar. Expect answers to questions on topics such as the latest developments in AML CFT, sanctions, fraud, anti-bribery and corruption, and export controls, financial integrity risks related to the global pandemic, and regionally focused financial crime risks. As always, we link to the show notes with further information and signups. On behalf of Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, and myself, Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitor, We'd like to thank you for joining us for This Week in FCPA, episode 231 for the week ending December 4th, 2020, the 50 Days to Inauguration edition. Please be safe. We hope you have good health for the week, and we look forward to seeing you next week on This Week in FCPA.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of This Week in FCPA. If you have any questions, you can email Jay at jrosen@affiliatedmonitors.com. You can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. I hope you'll join Jay and I again next week for another episode of This Week in FCPA. This Week in FCPA is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks again, and we look forward to visiting with you again.